I started by serving in the Obama administration, and I was the only member of the president's cabinet to be in the Obama administration, but then to serve in the Trump administration. And I think for me, the most impactful times were when we got major change done for veterans. 11 legislative bills through Congress, through the president's desk, and that began to really make major change for veterans.
If you're a veteran in the U.S. right now and you're hearing about these changes, which ones resonate with you most? Which ones are what can veterans point to and say, hey, this has changed?
Well, first of all, you have to remember we have 20 million veterans in this country, so it's a significant part of our population. And the VA does so many things, but one of those major pieces of legislation that we got done was to do the new GI Bill and to be able to help people and actually their dependents get the type of education that they want to be able to pursue the careers after the military is really important. We made getting their disability appeals through a very bureaucratic process easier and faster. And then we really started to improve health care, and those things impact people's lives.
Just to take a step back, you spent a tumultuous 15 months serving as President Trump's first Secretary of Veterans Affairs, and you clashed with people. You clashed with the White House and other political appointees. What were those clashes mainly about?
Well, when you serve, when you come into government, I think you have to know what you believe in and be willing to stand up for your principles. And so I knew that every day that I served at the pleasure of the president. And I worked hard to make every day count because it might have been my last day. And the big issue that I clashed with the administration on was how much we wanted to privatize the VA.
You've made the connection between privatizing the VA, which you've sort of likened to dismantling the VA. Why would that happen? Why would privatizing the VA lead to a weaker system?
I believe that our veterans deserve to get the very best care anywhere. If there's any group of Americans who need the best that this country can offer, it should be our veterans. And so that means when the care is best in the private sector, a private hospital, a private doctor, I think they should go there. And we started to move the VA in that direction to allow veterans to have choices in the private sector. But the VA does services and provides health care for veterans that the private sector just doesn't do well. And so I think you need a strong VA system, modernizing it, making sure it's there for the future, at the same time while opening the system up. And that really wasn't the model that some people, some of the political appointees in my organization felt that we needed to do.
What did you want to reform at the VA that you just didn't feel like you could?
Well, when I entered the VA, there was a national wait time crisis. Veterans were waiting way too long for care, and unfortunately some were being harmed by that wait. So the most important thing to me was to make sure that no veterans were being harmed by a wait, and then begin to really modernize the system so it becomes efficient and easier to use and more responsive to what veterans want.
When I talk to veterans a lot, they constantly bring up medical marijuana.
Yeah.
And I know that it's an issue that the VA has been looking at. So do you think that the VA should be researching medical marijuana?
I do. I think that the VA should be researching anything and any reasonable question that may help veterans. We have too many issues with 20 veterans a day taking their life from suicide, and too many people suffering with chronic pain and anxiety issues and other problems that are essentially these invisible wounds of war. It is an obligation, I believe, that we explore everything and anything that could help veterans. And certainly medical marijuana, as we see, now legalized in over half the states. And I'm not talking about recreational marijuana, I'm talking about properly prescribed.
But in order to do that research, how does that work legally with where marijuana currently stands at the federal level?
Well, I do think that there needs to be some legislative relief to allow VA researchers to be able to access a very restricted drug right now to be able to do research on it. And I think that with some legislation, and there is some pending before Congress, it would allow the researchers to be able to look at these questions in a much easier way.
What are you hearing from veterans? What are you hearing are the real important issues that veterans feel like they need more support on, they need more resources on? What are you hearing from veterans?
The biggest issue that I worry about is whether veterans are getting the benefits that they deserve in areas that frankly date back as far back as the Vietnam War and exposure to Agent Orange. We still have veterans that are waiting and fighting with us about us honoring our obligation to them. We have veterans of the Gulf War with burn pits that are suffering, that still are having to fight us over getting the right benefits. So I want to see a system that's more responsive and that really makes sure that we honor our commitment to those men and women who have raised their hand to protect us.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.